26th of March, and the TEDx event is happening here in Poland. This is a fact. It was a bright, cold day in Poland, and a big group of people gathered to share some interesting ideas. This is an interpretation of the same fact. There can be hundreds, thousands, or millions of interpretations of the same historical fact. One fact, millions of interpretations by different people, different interest groups, different media, just students maybe. But which one is the truth? Which interpretation is at least close to the truth? Is there any universal truth about any historical event? What is the fact in general? Well, when I'm interested in the meaning of the word, usually I look at the etymology and it brings me to the Latin, or if I'm less lucky, to the ancient Greek. But these two are also connected, especially in the scientific terminology. And the word fact comes from Latin factus, which means things that has been done, has been performed by someone or something. Let's assume that it was human, right? Presumably human did something. But when this human was doing this fact, he was also thinking about something because he had mind. He had different motivations to do it, he had the goals of doing it. There were other preventive and supportive forces, right? And these aspects, these factors together, they are concentrated in this one fact. And later, they help us to explain, describe, and then interpret this fact, this one fact, with the millions of possibilities and criteria to describe it. And later, these interpretations influence our understanding of our reality, our history, and maybe future, as George Orwell would argue. But how do we get familiar with interpretations? How do we interact with them? How do they really influence our minds? Well, all the information is divided for me on two parts. First one is that we receive about our environment directly. So we see things, we feel things, we smell things, we hear things. But there is also another reality, distant reality, which is bigger, starting from space and finishing with the civil war in Yemen, for example, that we are also informed about, right? Since we are international relations students and interested in these topics of conflicts, wars, and different projects. But how do we really get this information? We are not there, we have not been in the Second World War, but we are informed about it. It is in our reality, it is in our mind. Well, this kind of information has to be delivered to us by someone or something that is between us and this distant reality, this unknown reality. Again, Latin. What is the word for between in Latin? It's medius. And what is the plural form of medius in Latin? Media, right? So what is between us and the unknown reality is called media in Greek philosophy and later in also Latin studies. But when we hear word media right now, we mostly associate it with the means of mass communications, right? Television, radio, newspapers, internet nowadays. But what is the first media in our lives that connects us with the unknown reality, the distant reality that we are interested about? Well, I believe these are our parents, our mothers that tell us the stories about the unknown reality that we're interested about, our fathers that tell us how to live in our childhood. But our parents are also the first propaganda agents in our lives. They're the first propagandists. Why? Because we receive a lot of propaganda messages from them, right? A lot of interpretations of the fact that are not really true, sometimes are not true at all. But what is the propaganda? We all know it is a manipulative selection of the facts with a specific goal to manipulate and direct the human behavior, right? What are the classic examples of propaganda in our childhood? For example, don't trust the strangers, right? Well, not every stranger is a threat actually, and mostly we don't really meet the people that are a threat for us in our childhood, especially even strangers. But propaganda message says that every stranger is a threat. But well, that's a pretty beneficial propaganda because it helps us stay safe in childhood. But there are also other propaganda messages in our childhood that are not that beneficial and are not that close to reality. For example, the legend about the Boogeyman, right? That comes and punishes us when we misbehave, right? This legend is very interesting because it has penetrated actually practically every culture, every language. When I was in China and I heard this story, I was surprised because it's completely different language, completely different history, but they have the same concept. We in Georgia have the same concept. You here have Baba Yaga that lives in forest and punishes misbehaving children, or presumably eating them. So parents scare us and manipulate us by creating the enemy, right? The boogeyman that comes. And it really works. But what is surprising is that this concept and this technique of propaganda also works in global politics. It worked in history and it works nowadays too. Do you remember these boogeymans that were created to manipulate the massive minds, such as Jews in Nazi Germany, then later communists for some kind of countries, then Americans for opposites, terrorists, now immigrants? Well, it works, but why does it work? What is the main factor that works, that helps it work, that helps propagandists to perceive their ideas and to achieve their ideas by these techniques? Well, I believe it is trust. But if we are lucky to trust the people that really love us and show care about us in childhood, when we grow up and our media is not our parents anymore, when we read the newspapers, we watch TV, we go to universities, right? And we receive all those interpretations not from parents anymore, but from different sources, different media. And the media becomes real media that we associate it with. But it is alarming how many of us think that media is the first and final authority on all the news and information in the world. That media informs the public, helps the public, serves the public, so that we could better engage and participate in the political or economic processes. But what if media has its own agenda, just like our parents had their own agenda while telling us the stories about the boogeyman, right? What if it is like this? Well, usually the big media corporations in our world are the part of the bigger conglomerates and the bigger holdings, right? What is the main goal of corporation or holding in the free market? Well, benefit, right? Revenue, income. And they're pushing to the directions that guarantees them this profit. And it is very natural, it is fair, it is legal, right? And another interesting thing about the media is that it costs a lot. So in any business plan, when you have the plan's benefit, you also have the costs, right? And these costs are extremely high because modern media costs a lot. It costs a lot more than we, consumers and users, are ready to pay and able to pay. But that money is there. Where does the money come from? Well, magic word, advertisers, right? What are the advertisers paying for? They're paying for your conscious and continuous attention, right? So at the end of the day, the main product of the media corporations, big media corporations, is not the content like news, TV shows, debates, documentaries, or Hollywood movies, right? The main product that they are selling and making the profit is you, us, our attention, right? Well, let's get back to reality for now. Let's talk about the more important issues. What is the main challenge of our society, 21st century, let's say, right? Very symbolic. Well, terrorism, right? That's what we see on TV, that's what we see in movies, that's what we are told in universities, especially in international relations programs, political science, right? We know all the names of terrorist organizations, we know where they are based, we know their goals, we know where the finance comes from, who fights against them, which department of CIA or other special services in US or other countries, even our countries. Well, yes, I agree, terrorism is one big challenge, especially in our century. But do you happen to know the number of deaths caused by terrorism? Well, the highest number that I have seen is from 2014, and it is nearly 45,000 deaths per year, the direct cause of terrorist activities in the world. So that's a big tragedy, of course, and we have to work on it. But what about the other challenges? And I'm confident that terrorism is not the biggest challenge of our society as media convinced us. What about other challenges? Let's say air pollution. Do you know what is the estimated death rate for caused by air pollution? World Health Organization says that it's more than 4,200,000. Well, that's nearly 100 times a bigger number than the deaths caused by terrorism. But do we really see the air pollution movies? But I think that can be a very interesting topic for sci-fi, etc. But we don't really see it promoted, right? We don't really see this in the primetime television as a news. But it is huge. Yes, I agree that these two things are pretty specific to compare the death rate, but as a challenge, they're kind of equal, right? And they have to be treated proportionally. So at least 100 times more time should be connected with air pollution topics, right? But it is not. Well, try to find out why. In different times in our history, word propaganda was related to another magic word, education, right? But according to Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a very interesting source of information, not sure how reliable, but in definition, it is written that the main factors that distinguishes propaganda from education is the selectiveness and manipulation of the facts. So while propagandist tries to convince us about something with a one-sided story supported with just part of the facts and arguments, the educator should show us a whole global picture, right? To provide us with the grounds of believing in what he states, but also the grounds for doubting, right? Doubting his beliefs that he shares with us, doubting the sources, to think critically, etc. But is it real in our world? Do we really have the educational systems that are working like this? Well, let's have a look on some big countries and some big examples. The story is Pakistan and India, for example. The history in these two countries is just the opposite of another in significant cases, right? Both claim the victories in wars. The hero in one's history is a villain for another. Some territory is theirs from the beginning of the time, and we have a lot of these examples. China and Japan, also South Korea in that story. Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? A lot of different interpretations of the reality. Now, TEDx stage is not the place to judge who is right and why. So let's do it in another platform. But what we can really conclude from these examples is that, well, everyone has its own reality and it cannot be one. And when it is not one, it doesn't exist, right? And when people, millions of people, 100 millions of people in case of Pakistan and Japan, or billions of people in case of China and India, believe in their reality, in their interpretation of reality, it really becomes our common reality, or at least it shapes it significantly, especially when the three countries from the listed ones are nuclear powers, and the fourth is technologically advanced, and also one of the biggest potential military potentials in the, at least Asia Pacifics. Right? But what is the way out of it? How can we defend ourselves from this propaganda? Well, same way as kids do, same way as we do in our childhood, right? Start asking the questions. Stupid questions, smart questions, but just questions. Kids, after all these propaganda messages from the parents, they begin to ask questions. They start with stupid questions such as, where does the babies come from? And finish with the serious questions like, why are some people rich and some people poor? Right? They will still be lied to for quite some time, but eventually they will find the alternative sources and they will find the truth. And that's what I believe we can learn from kids and ourselves in our childhood, our past. Right? One of the biggest propaganda practitioners and propaganda artists the world has ever seen, William Shakespeare, described life in Macbeth as a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and the fury, signifying nothing. So Shakespeare believes that the tale, which is associated with life, is meaningless just because it is told by an idiot. So I believe, together with William, that who tells our story, who tells the tale of our life is very important. Don't let anyone be a narrator of your story. Have your own tale, have your own reality, and have a nice day. Thank you.